Hello, everyone, and welcome to Mind Your Mental. Just a reminder that this podcast is not meant to be a substitute for a relationship with a licensed mental health professional. I know they are hard to find, and I get that. I have a bunch of resources on my website if you need them, but I am not your clinician. I am a psychologist, but I am not your psychologist. So if you need any specific help, please look for the help of a licensed mental health professional. Learn all you can learn from the podcast. Enjoy the episode. What's up, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Mind Your Mental. So it is the last day of Autism Awareness Month, and I felt that this would be the perfect episode to introduce my new format of the podcast. So we will have episodes where we cover a specific topic with many perspectives. For example, for this episode, we are going to be joined by Amanda Seals, Maria Davis-Pierre, Elizabeth Booker Houston, and Dr. Hokahe Echo. This episode is going to talk about autism spectrum disorder. So it's important to start with what is autism spectrum disorder. First of all, autism spectrum disorder is a neurodevelopmental diagnosis that involves persistent challenges in social interaction, speech and nonverbal communication, and can also include restricted or repetitive behaviors. Some diagnoses can be associated with developmental delays that can appear as early as 18 months. Early symptoms can include lack of response to children's name, reduced interest in people, difficulties with eye contact, and delayed language skills. And then as individuals grow older, they may exhibit a strong preference for routine. They may have sensitive to sensory input, and they may have challenges in understanding social cues and emotions. Here's the thing, y'all. You know what they say. If you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. Okay? Your mental health is a fingerprint, and symptoms manifest differently in any and everyone. So don't fall prey to the lazy stereotype thinking that you know what someone is going through when it comes to autism or any diagnosis for that matter. If someone has let you know that they have been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, you can be respectful and ask them what that means for them. What does autism spectrum disorder look like for you? But I want you to also understand that we live in the information age, and someone may not have the time or energy to educate you. So you can also educate yourself on the spectrum of symptomology. Now, this wasn't even going to be the topic I discussed with Amanda. I was going to discuss activism and resistance fatigue, which is exhaustion and burnout that often accompanies the work of activists and organizers and advocates. But when I started the show and said, "How are you doing? How's everything been going with you?" Amanda said,
"How am I doing? I mean, I'm not sure when this airs, but it's been a very taxing month, the last 4 weeks. And so I had a lot of ups and downs emotionally in that time. Mm-hmm. And I also I'm pretty sure I'm autistic.
And I felt that was a topic we're delving into deeply. So that's what this episode is about. So we'll hear from Amanda about her experience. We'll hear from Dr. Echo, who is a board certified pediatrician with 10 plus years of experience and has recently opened a virtual assessment clinic for autism and ADHD diagnoses. We'll hear from Maria Davis-Pierre, who is the founder and CEO of Autism in Black, which is an organization that aims to bring awareness to autism and reduce the stigma associated with the diagnosis in the Black community. And we'll also hear from Elizabeth Booker Houston, who is a lawyer, comedian, political and social commentary, who also shares her experience with parenting a son that has been diagnosed with autism. So here we go. Hey, everyone, just a reminder that Mind Your Mental is not just a podcast. It is also a amazing community, if I do say so myself. It's phenomenal. I mean, you get more access to me. What more could you want in this life? So if you want to join the community, if you're not already on the community, go to my social media. My social media is the same, Raquel Martin, PhD, and DM me the word community so you can get details on joining this amazing flipping community. You get more access to me, y'all. Like, I'm a delight. All right. Hope to see you there.
And I also I'm pretty sure I'm autistic.
Did you just recently do assessments for it?
Yep. And it's something I feel like I innately always had you always know, like, there's something different about me. And then I just started to learn more about autism in general. And I would just see things and I would watch shows and I'd be like, oh, I used to do that. Or, oh, I do that.
Yeah.
Oh, I have that. And I had done a couple like self-assessment tests a couple years ago. And I did land on the spectrum in those tests, but I was just like, I don't know, whatever. And then during this whole phase, of being just, publicly bullied for the same things that I've been bullied about my entire life, right? So that's the other part of it. It's not like they came with some new haha shit. It's like, you're difficult, you're mean, you're extra, you're too serious. I started seeing a lot of women come into my DMs, particularly Black women come into my DMs and in my comments saying, I'm neurodivergent. I have been accused of all these things as well. I'm neurodivergent. I have had difficulty holding jobs for these reasons, et cetera, et cetera. And I actually haven't had difficulty holding jobs. Like, I've never been fired, but I have had to find like my pockets of safety within those jobs because I am different. But I then asked my psychiatrist about this. And so she gave me like a bunch of self-assessment tests, which I did. And I'm not even just like, I'm like in the thick of the neurodivergent spectrum. Like, it's not like if you scored a 28 and I scored a 29, it's like I scored a 34. And then I still didn't believe it. So I did all the tests again, just to be sure.
So I think it's important to also share that I believe Amanda's statement about self-assessment at the directive of her psychiatrist really highlights something crucial about the journey many people face and understanding their own neurodiversity. It's not uncommon for individuals, especially women and those from diverse backgrounds, to find the path to diagnosis later in life. For example, a recent study led by Dr. Allison Ratto and a team of researchers has brought forward a new tool called the Self-Assessment of Autistic Traits, or the SAT. So this tool is unique because it's developed not only by researchers, but with the direct involvement of individuals that have been diagnosed with autism themselves. And what's so innovative about the SAT is that it includes a broad range of autistic experiences, many of which are often overlooked by traditional diagnostic tools. And I think that's because they're not often created with the direct involvement of individuals that have been diagnosed with autism themselves. Okay. And it's particularly significant because many people who receive a diagnosis later in life have learned to mask their traits, or they might display traits that aren't as well recognized. The SAT uses descriptions of autism for those who live with this diagnosis, which provides a more inclusive and accessible approach. Whether you're seeking a formal diagnosis or you're trying to understand aspects of your behavior, the SAT represents a shift towards a more personalized and empathetic approach to autism. Now, while the SAT opens up new avenues for understanding and identifying autism, it also brings us to an increasingly common practice, and that's self-diagnosis when it comes to adults. Now, many adults, perhaps like some of y'all listening today, may find themselves navigating the complexity of identifying as autistic without a formal diagnosis. And there are so many reasons for that. In fact, so many reasons that a review entitled Understanding the Self-Identification of Autism in Adults, which was done by Dr. Gail Overton and colleagues, identified a bunch of reasons why adults are turning to self-diagnosis of autism. There's skepticism and a lack of recognition of autism in adults by healthcare professionals. There's fear of not being believed and frequent misdiagnoses with other mental health conditions. Additionally, the accessibility of information about autism through the internet and online communities can also empower individuals to identify symptoms that resonate with their experiences. Now, this trend is definitely compounded by systemic obstacles such as geographic or institutional barriers, especially not limited to the financial barriers. Man, they want you to, do you want to purchase a home? You want to put a deposit on a home, or you want to get an official diagnosis of autism? This is going to restrict access to professional diagnostic services. It leads individuals to seek understanding and community support through self-diagnosis. And I thought that it was incredibly important to state this. I recorded this episode before Amanda did her Club Shay Shay episode, and I'm looking at all this backlash about self-diagnosis, and I'm just going to put this out here. The resources are going to be in the show notes if you want to read about them. Amanda Seals is not a 10-year-old self-diagnosing themselves with autism spectrum disorder at the behest of her psychiatrist. She used self-assessment measures. And I think it's okay to acknowledge and understand that $10,000 for an exam is a lot, right? I'm not a clinician who feels like self-assessment is just the worst thing in life. I will say time and time again, I will be the expert in the room when it comes to therapy and mental health and psychology, but you will be the expert in the room when it comes to you. So please share with me more about like what you think needs to be done with Amanda in her life. I'm gonna just put that out there. I'm gonna just put that out there. All right, back to Amanda.
And now I have to get a full official assessment, which is very, very expensive, by the way. It's like $5,000.
You must have good insurance. 5,000 is actually on the low end, unfortunately. It's one of the barriers to people getting diagnosed, especially when they're younger and getting the resources they deserve, is the cost of the assessment. Like the number of children who need that and need to have resources for them in school, and parents because you could get additional resources from the government if your child is diagnosed with that, so they can have the support they deserve, but they can't afford the assessments. And if they can't afford the assessments, then people are like, well, I know you know your child and your child knows themselves, and we can also identify that they need these additional resources, but I'm gonna need that like $5,000 test before we give you any of the care you deserve. That's insane.
Crazy. Well, I told my mom, and my mom started looking up, signs that your child could be autistic. And then she's like, you fit like 11 out of 15 of these when you were a child. Mm-hmm. So that's how I am. This is like within the last 48 hours. So it is quite a revelation. And there's a lot of feelings attached to it that will be discussed in this conversation.
Yeah. So I was going to say, as someone who I've done full batteries, I haven't done an autism full battery because those individuals have an amazingly profound assessment. You have to be certified in that. But as someone who's also done other neurodivergent diagnoses, when I'm doing the assessments and I do like the wrap-up session with the parents, because the sessions I used to do, they'd be like 2 days, 3 hours each day. I'm asking teachers, I'm asking parents, I'm asking the kids, we're doing a bunch of tests. And then I wrap all that up to like a 20-page document that I, of course, like speak to normally and talk to the parents about it. And what I do is I typically start off with being like, okay, so these are the things that brought you in today, and naming all the symptoms and being like, and these are the things that I saw. And the thing I said in every single session was, when I provide these diagnoses, I'm giving you a name to things that you've already seen, because I'm going to be the expert in the room when it comes to psychology and mental health, but you're the expert in the room when it comes to your child. And you guys saw some things, and this is what it brought up in the diagnosis. And I said, my job is to provide you with ways to advocate for yourself and get the most resources possible and kind of like guide you through this process. I've never given a diagnosis and a parent was like, oh, no way, like ever. Because the way I frame it is like, this is what you're seeing. They struggle with this. Okay. But everybody has learning and thinking differences. So what we're going to do, since we identified that this is something they need help with, this is what I want you to do to get the help in the school. Or this is what I want you to do in the home. Like, we're providing a name to it. There's a diagnosis associated with it. And the names could be scary for a lot of people. But the big thing is, like, now that we have this, when I tell you I'm be able to get you every single resource you need for this school, I'm going to get you everything. I want you to save this to your phone. And as soon as there's an issue, I just want you to bring it up. So when Amanda shared that she shared this information with her mom, it really resonated with me, because I think that so many parents experience this. So I thought it was really important to include parents of children with autism spectrum disorder in this episode, which brings us to Elizabeth Booker Houston. One of the biggest things I see is like it takes so long to receive a diagnosis. And Dr. Echo mentioned that it's a 2-year wait list in where she is. And that's why she created her virtual clinic. So what was your experience with getting a diagnosis for your son?
So my experience was very quick, and it was totally by a fluke.
Really?
By fluke. And this is an outlier. And this is going to tell you just how difficult it is to get a diagnosis of the craziness that had to occur. So when I was in my 3rd trimester, my son's long bones were measuring short, and they thought he might have a form of skeletal dysplasia. They weren't sure if it was going to be lethal or if it would be like dwarfism, like a chondroplasia, something with where he would survive at birth and then have a decent quality of life. I went to the Fetal Medicine Institute at Children's National in Washington, D.C. We live in the D.C. area. Thank goodness we were able to go to the Fetal Medicine Institute. see Dr. Jamie Frazier. She was great. She did, I did a fetal MRI. I still have those pictures to this day. It is very, very freaky to see my baby just floating around inside my body like that. You can see like his little eyeball and everything.
Yeah.
And they did all the measurements. She said, you know what? She said, I think he might just be constitutionally small, meaning that like all around he was kind of just a smaller child. And then I also had something up with my umbilical cord. So there was a potential that he just wasn't getting enough nutrients. So at 37 weeks, he was born.
Gotcha.
He looked typical. He looked average, just small. He was like 5 pounds, 3 ounces when I brought him home. He was just small. And we followed up, a couple months later at the Fetal Medicine Institute. Dr. Frazier took a look at him. She was like, we'll run if you're cool with it, we'll do some genetic testing, all of that, because for him, yes, but also just because it helps them with their data collection. And I wanted to go ahead and go forth with that because it would help other women who were in my position when they were pregnant, to help like really get information out there. So all that to say, the next year when we were following up at 14 months, when he, was experiencing a speech delay, because she is, at the Fetal Medicine Institute, was able to basically like fast track him into early intervention in our county. So at 14 months, he started early intervention virtually because he was born right before the pandemic. He was born December 2019. So we're still kind of in a pandemic. So we're doing this virtually. And she also said, I'm going to go ahead and set you guys up with a developmental evaluation with our psychologists here at Children's National. And that was that summer, around like June or July. At the time, the developmental psychologist was like, I don't really feel comfortable diagnosing him with anything. Kind of want to wait and see. He was only 18 months old. So, and he doesn't display the typical autistic traits that people look at. When you see those videos where it's like how I knew my baby had autism, they didn't smile, they didn't make eye contact, they walked on their toes, they flapped. He don't do none of that. And I think that's just a good example for people to understand that autism is truly a spectrum, and it's not like a line.
It's a spectrum.
It's a circle. And I think
sometimes people say spectrum is like a word, like, oh, the spectrum. I'm like, yes. Do you know what that means though? Because, that means that there's a range. It's not just a word. It's a range. So that's why when people are like, oh, I'm sure it's not the case. I'm like, well, there's no way to know until you get an assessment because everyone's mental health is a fingerprint. It's the same thing with diagnosis. Is a fingerprint.
Everyone is different. And the crux of autism, please correct me as the professional if I'm misstating this, is pretty much that there is some sort of social communication deficit. Like that's like the thing that
social responsiveness and things like that.
Exactly. So all of these other autistic traits that come with it, which can also be seen in other neurodivergences, aren't dispositive or necessarily indicative of autism because the crux of it is that social communication piece. And I saw that with him. I was like, this boy ain't talking because he don't get it. Like he doesn't get the social. And I just knew looking at him, and I was like, I know what's up because I got a lot of autistic friends. I worked with autistic kids myself. Like, I was like, I know what's up. So I said, let's go ahead and schedule the next one. So the psychologist was like, yeah, we'll go ahead and put them on the schedule. Because again, like you said, that wait list is crazy. So we went ahead and got a date for a year from then. So by the time he was, I don't know, I'll say 30 months, crazy to say 30 months, but you know how specific it is when you get the, at that time, we still talking in months, diagnostically and all that. He finally got the autism diagnosis. They said, okay, yes, we see enough. A few things were like the 3-point gaze. That was kind of a giveaway, even though he made eye contact, and just a few little things that helped them make that connection. Because, unlike what people will think of with autistic children, he's very into pretend play. He has a baby doll that he has taken care of since he was very little. He's a very social child. But as far as like the communication piece and like really understanding, he definitely has that hyper focus when it comes to certain things as well. Very selective eating as well. We're keeping our eyes out for ARFID right now. That's where we're at right now. That he's 4 years old, so we're kind of keeping our eyes peeled for that.
And ARFID is restrictive food intake disorder for anyone who doesn't know.
So, and there's a lot of thank you. There's a lot of co-occurrence with autistic people and ARFID. So, anywho, all that to say, we were very fortunate to get a diagnosis, and that was the easy part. The hard part was the next step, which were services. So I'm not doing ABA. It's not. I just, as a parent and hearing from enough autistic voices, I was not comfortable with ABA therapy. It's controversial.
And ABA is applied behavior analysis.
Yes. And I used to work in a mouse lab with Skinner boxes. And you know what? I was like, I don't trust this man who's the father. And I joke because it is very different from that. But that's just kind of, former psych researcher joke. About, yeah. But yeah, I just wasn't comfortable with that. And so I asked the psychologist, it was kind of funny. She said, okay, I'm going to go ahead and diagnose him with autism spectrum disorder. And I was like, okay. And she said, do you have any questions? I was like, no. Like, I had no, I know that some parents, there's like a mourning period or like a grief. I honest to God, didn't have any of that. I'm neurodivergent myself. I'm autistic. I'm not autistic. I'm autistic, but I'm neurodivergent myself. I have autistic-like traits myself. Me and my son actually have a lot of the same traits. Suspect some members of my family have been undiagnosed autistic.
Yeah.
A lot of ADHD, just a lot of different neurodivergences. So I was like, this ain't nothing new, and he's the same kid, and he's cool as hell. So the psychologist was a little taken aback because I don't know, she was waiting for me to like cry or something. Not like rude on her. I think it's typical. It happens. Like parents, when they envision a certain way about their child. But honestly, I couldn't picture a neurotypical child because there ain't nobody in my family neurotypical, and I'm not myself, and neither is my husband. So I was like, I'm fine with this. We're cool. But my next question was immediately, what do you have that's not ABA therapy to recommend? And she said floor time, which is DIR therapy. And that is a neurodiversity affirming therapy that a lot of autistics have recommended. And we are so fortunate being in the DC area that the Floor Time Center headquarters is in Bethesda, Maryland. It was like 15 minutes from our house.
Yes.
So
that's amazing.
It was great. Until you find out that insurance covers almost none of it.
Doesn't. That's the difficult part. And you even mentioned, you said that your diagnosis process was quick, but it was still a year, Elizabeth.
It was still a
like
year.
You said, you still were on a year. It was still a year. So like when you hear the word quick, I just want to just zoom in. Like a quick was a year, y'all. Like it wasn't even quick, like, 2-3 weeks. No, we were lucky to get in within 12 months. That was amazing. Right. Like and the aspect of insurance not covering it, and even you understanding, within your family, that you're just like, oh, well, all of us are neurotypical and being receptive to that. But that's not what everyone understands. We joked earlier about, because I said, I'm pretty sure Elizabeth's son has autism, because I remember her saying this joke about the fact that your son and your dad have similar traits. Yep. And everyone has this little like, oh, now everybody got autism and ADHD. And I was like, no, everybody doesn't have it. It's not a new thing. It's just the fact that we're not trying to beat differences out of children anymore. Exactly. We're not trying to say like, do it this way or else, There was this whole study about the fact that like there are more left-handed people, and someone was like, oh, I want to provide a rebuttal to this. They actually used to like harm people who wrote with their left hand. So it's not the fact that there are more, left-handed people. It's the fact that we're not physically assaulting. Yeah, we're not forcing. So I really want people to understand, like, this isn't forcing. Yeah, they would like force them to, I think at one point I saw something that said they thought that meant that the devil was in them.
That's what they told my mom.
Like, it was a lot.
My mom went to Catholic school and she's left-handed, but for whatever reason,
and they said the devil is.
They said it was like the devil's hand or something like that. Like she would tell me that when I was little but I guess her parents didn't really take it seriously, so she didn't get like abused into writing with her right hand, but she is left-handed. And she remembers. That's what I'm saying.
Y'all, we're only able to make jokes about it because we know this, like we know the facts, but like it sounds funny, but this is someone's real life. Just be like, that's the devil in your hand. You know what we got to do? Chop it off. Right with your right hand, or we're chopping it off.
And that's what we're seeing with autistic individuals, is things like forcing eye contact, and that's very ableist. You don't have to make eye contact, trying to stop stimming that isn't harmful, or, why can't somebody just...
It's not harmful. It's not inconvenient. It's not causing you any difficulty. It's just the child soothing themselves. Yeah. What's the problem? What's the big deal? Is there stimming punching you in the face? No, then shut up.
Exactly.
Exactly.
It's so crazy. And so I was like, I know that ABA therapy is a lot about changing behavior, and I did not want to go with that. And so the problem with insurance, first and foremost, is that autism is a neurodevelopmental disorder. It is not a mental disorder, and like as far as like the behavior aspect and how it's categorized, it's under medical care. It's not under mental health as far as how it's supposed to be with insurance, right? And the first hurdle was that insurance, because I don't even know, the nurse who had our file kept putting it under behavioral health and was like, you're not covered under this. It's like, it's medical. It goes under my medical insurance. And I had to argue with them about what autism was so they would then fix it, so insurance would cover it. But then on top of that, they didn't want to cover anything really with floor time. But I fought tooth and nail every single month. I mean, hours and hours and hours of my life fighting with Aetna. Mind you, and this, you know, I have amazing federal health insurance. Okay. Like as a federal employee, some of the best health insurance you can get. The premiums are not cheap. And I still had to fight everybody every single month. And in order to get my son into the floor time program and the TheraSchool program, which was part-time, 3 hours a day, 4 days a week, included speech and OT, as well as like a preschool setting in this very neurodiversity affirming setting. 9 months, I think I shelled out $40,000.
And that's just,
yeah. And I got reimbursed for maybe 10,000 of it. Maybe 10,000 of it came back to me from insurance.
Just the thought process of you having, and the thing is, like, when people talk about the aspect of like understanding how to advocate for things, I've described it as like, it's like a cognitive privilege, and it shouldn't be a privilege, but like the amount of time and energy it takes to look up things and research and understand the language, that is very much a privilege, because to be able to read this, understand it, grasp it, research, cross-research to see what's effective, be on the phone for hours upon hours, even be able to pay it, like whether you're able to pay it now or go into debt, like it is a privilege, and it shouldn't be, right? Like you're advocating for, you want to get the best care for your child. Nobody knows your child better than you. You want to get the best care for your child, so what they're going to be receptive to, and you find this amazing care. And not only did you have enough, mindset to put them in it, you have to go back and forth about it. And that's the most difficult part. Like, people get an assessment and they're like, okay, it took 2 years to get the assessment. And then you're like, okay, now that you told me what I already knew, how do I get the resources? And that's the most difficult part, because so many people will be like, well, I already know my child and I can provide these resources. I think that's amazing. However, we unfortunately live in a space where, to justify the resources that need to get covered by insurance or covered by the school, you have to get that diagnosis. There are so many people, it's just like, what's the point? Well, their child can't get the resources that they deserve in school unless they get this diagnosis. What if you tell them, like, this is what your child needs? They say, okay, we understand that. We're going to need the paperwork that states that we have to provide your child with these resources. Because at the end of the day, that's schools have to provide your children with the resources that they deserve. However, you have to, they're like, prove it.
And we could have
I know you're saying it.
And we could have absolutely gone with the state program. We could have gone with, what insurance did cover 100%, but it was going to be ABA. Insurance does not really cover anything else. And so you're between a rock and a hard place. And I understand that there are some families, there are some folks who have told me, like, ABA worked for them, it was good for them. I'm like, that is great. But as I said, there's so much controversy surrounding ABA and in finding the right provider. And why, if I have the option to go to this center that, from many autistic people, have told me that's a great neurodiversity affirming, place. Because again, I listen to actually autistic people. I do want to plug this in the moment right now. I'm not an autism mom. Please don't anybody ever call me that. I have a real problem with that label, and I got a problem with autism moms. I'm not trying to hate on y'all, but defining your identity by your child's diagnosis is weird behavior. I don't want to ask.
It's a lot. I always say that people shouldn't, the same way I mentioned, my whole life isn't about my children. Well, it's not supposed to be. I have my own separate identity, and that puts a lot of pressure on the child.
And it's not.
They don't need that.
It's the problem is those groups unfortunately get siloed, and they're not. There's almost no autistic moms in that group, which is a very different label from an autism mom. And I want to hear from autistic people. So that's where I went to, because unfortunately, just in those spaces, and autistic adults have grown up and they've said, this is harmful, like those groups, because it takes away autistic voices and takes away autistic people's agency. So the first place I wanted to go to was from actually autistic people. I love the hashtag actually autistic, because that means I can find content from people who are actually autistic and learn what the best options are out there. So like any parent listening, and if anybody going through a diagnosis or if your child has been diagnosed, please, I highly recommend turning to those spaces. There's a group I'm in on Facebook that's called Autism Inclusivity, and only autistic people are allowed to comment. Holistic people are not allowed to comment.
Okay.
And I like that because we're going to them to ask the questions that we want to ask. And it filters out that noise because it's like, I like that it's centering that, you know, it makes me think, and it's different. But as a Black woman, I don't want to see like a white woman speaking up about things that affect me and in that space, right? And like decentering me when somebody's asking about issues that face Black women. So it makes sense to me to have that same space for autistic individuals. So I like that group. It can be intense for a lot of people because they're very strict about the rules, but
yeah. But I mean, that makes sense though, right?
Yeah.
Because, you know, like being strict about it, being like, okay, well, this was a rule violation. I don't understand what your concern is. My concern is that you violated the rule.
Right. Exactly. That's it. It's simple. But
that's it.
But I've gone to them and also like the Therapist Neurodiversity Collective to kind of understand the harmful therapies that exist and the good stuff out there, because, you know, a lot of autism is just, I've learned, mired in controversy and eugenics, the entire controversy around Asperger's, which so many people still don't know, was named after a Nazi doctor who euthanized children who were too autistic and took children who were what we would call low support needs, right? And heralded them as like the tippy top. And things like Autism Speaks. Autism Speaks, again, they, you know, for years wouldn't allow an autistic person to be part of their board or their decision making. And then when they finally, after backlash, allowed autistic people to join in those decision making roles, they like push them out, you know? So like there's all of that. So it's like trying to find the right resource was really the hardest part, and trying to muck through that and figure out where I needed to look, who I needed to be listening to, because my son at this age, he can't tell me, he can't speak for himself. Like once he's older and can communicate to me his needs and what he's thinking and feeling, like I can take that into account. But it's really hard when you're dealing with a 2-year-old who's mostly nonverbal, right? And trying to do the best thing you can that's going to keep them safe. So the beginning process was definitely rough as far as finding insurance and finding the right path. But now we've gotten into a good groove. And when he turned 3, he qualified for the county public preschool, where he's on an individualized education plan or an IEP. And so that's where we are now. He's almost 4.5. And so he's going into his last year of pre-K in the fall, and then he'll go on to kindergarten. So we found a good rhythm. We found a good rhythm, but it took a little bit to get there.
Yeah, it did. Do you have any recommendations for parents who are going through that? Like, you provided some amazing resources when it comes to actually listening to the individuals, which makes sense because the same way, you know, we get pissed off when there's a bunch of men voting on what to do with our ovaries and our uterus. Yeah. Like we should also be as equally as upset if there's individuals who have not been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder telling us how to deal with individuals who have actually been diagnosed with that. So I think we can all understand why it's important to respect those voices. They should be at the center of the narrative. Do you have any other recommendations for people who are struggling? Anything that you wish you had known earlier about advocating, or anything that you think could possibly help? Because you mentioned, you know, you found a groove, but your child is now, you said he's 4.5. You've been working with this since he was 18. I mean, honestly, in utero, but like 18 months. And then you got the diagnosis, 12 months later. And then still after you got the diagnosis, there were all these things. What recommendations would you say, like, this would be helpful in addition to the resources that we're definitely going to tag in the show?
You know, I would say really, really understand your rights when it comes to IEPs, and understand the difference between an IEP and a 504 plan. That's really, really important because there's different rights and responsibilities that come with that. For example, just one example, a 504 plan, your school can alter that without consulting you. They can change an accommodation versus an IEP. They have to consult the parents, and the parents can request an IEP meeting at any time. Legally, you have that right.
Anytime, and do it in writing. Do it in writing, guys. You did get that right, because I did these psychoeducational assessments. Get everything in writing. If you guys have a conversation, follow up. I just want to do a follow up with the conversation we had. Put a formal request in. I am requesting on this date. I have not heard back from you. I'm forwarding this email. People can listen. People have, maybe they forgot. I'm not going to say people are being malicious, but they will deny conversations in person. You re-forward that email. This is the email I sent on the 14th. This is the email I sent on the 30th. And this is my follow-up email that I sent the next month on the 1st. And now I am CCing superintendents. Like, y'all, writing. Conversations be nothing. Okay. I forget what somebody tells me 5 minutes ago. I kid you not. So it's not always malicious. Nobody's getting the resources they deserve, but writing, guys. I want to see the writing. I kid you not. It drives me nuts. Write it down. Like, oh, we had a conversation. I don't care.
Write it down.
Oh, that sounds intense. I don't care. I want to see the email because I'm gonna flag that and pin it to the top, and you can follow up on that. So exactly. Yes, IEP. You can request meetings. Yes.
Request meetings, and also research if you are not comfortable with ABA. Like I was not. Make sure that you research terms that are not, obvious. This is where the Therapist Neurodiversity Collective is very helpful. They have a whole web page on their website that flags various like hidden ABA methods. So, you can steer away from that. So like read through the IEP in detail and make sure that you're not seeing methods in there that while they're not saying, oh, this is ABA, definitely like pay attention to that because it could be coded a little differently. Also look into things like the least restrictive environment. That's really important to figure out where your child belongs. I know my son is in a preschool class where there are some autistic children, some children who just have a speech delay but are not autistic, and children who are completely neurotypical and on the right developmental or average developmental track. I won't say right, but average developmental track. And it's a mixture, and I really like that because they all kind of learn from each other. They're in this environment together with a teacher and their paraeducators, and they're all learning together. So that's really great to see for my son, who is very social, but there are some children, maybe that's not for them. Maybe they do need something where there's a little more separation from them and the other students because maybe they get overstimulated. I know my son, he is hyposensitive, which is similar to myself, meaning he is sensory seeking. He doesn't actually get overstimulated easy at all. He likes the noise. He likes the lights. That boy will bring me his shoes and be like, shoes, go, because we have been in the house too much today. And he's like, we got to go do something. We got to go to the grocery store, the shopping mall. Like my baby, he likes to be out the house.
Yeah.
We live in DC. That boy loves to be in the middle of a crowded museum. He loves to run around the tourists by the Washington. That boy is just, but every child is different. And I think that's important to remember too. And again, I just want to reiterate, I'm speaking to autistic parents out here. I'm not trying to preach to anybody who's actually autistic. I'm not preaching to autistic people. This is me trying to talk to the parents. If you've met one autistic child, you've met one autistic child, and that includes in your own family.
Yes.
In your own
I love that saying. I always say that.
It's such a good saying because it's even in your own family, right? And autism is, we've seen there's genetic links, as I joked about on stage about my daddy. But there, so just because say you have multiple autistic children doesn't mean that their needs are going to be the same. And again, we don't look at, the terminology as has been taught to me is not looking at severe or mild. It's high support needs and low support needs. And that's a really important distinction that I think I wish I had known from the jump, because that description makes so much more sense to me, because you could be to, an outside person, talk without a speech delay, seem to be perfectly average, like you can function just fine in society without any support, but maybe you are high support needs. And maybe there's somebody who is nonverbal, but all they need is an AAC device, which is an electronic device that helps them speak. And for all intents and purposes and everything else, they're doing just fine. That would be a low support needs individual, right? Because they're just needing some sort of aid to help communicate. Maybe that's all they need. The problem with the mild, moderate, all that is it's taking really superficial ideas of autism, such as, well, they don't talk, so they must be severe. They must be severe. And it's not actually addressing what they need. It's not actually addressing the support that they need, because there's so many children who maybe were labeled severe because they're nonverbal, but all they needed was some sort of assistive device to help them talk. And that was it. But they're never given a voice, so they're melting down. They're constantly dysregulated. But if all, so that I feel like parents really need to understand that distinction, because it also kind of helps reframe things for the parents who are looking at their child and saying, my child's not talking. Oh my God, this is terrible. What is going to happen? It's not going to be the end of the world. It's not going to be the end of the world because this world is not built for neurodivergent people. It's not built for disabled people. And we have to remember that just because somebody might need a tool or something to assist them to get through the world doesn't mean that they can't do or accomplish what someone else who doesn't need those assistive devices can do. So,
Yeah. I love that. And I when I'm talking to children, to parents about the diagnoses, I always make it a point to mention, like, so if you guys are looking at the video or not, me and Elizabeth actually have one of the most normalized accommodations out there. What do you think that is? What do you think it is, though? Guess. Glasses. Listen to me. You don't ever hear anyone saying something about people who need contacts or glasses or want laces. This is an accommodation. It is just a normalized accommodation. Exactly. And the problem is not one of my students, she was telling me like how she was having such a difficult time and saying what was wrong with her. And I was like, there's nothing wrong with you. I want you to take it. It's something wrong with the world. Okay. You are glorious. All right. We need to, it's the accommodations. Don't get upset. I said, one, I'm not going to tell you what not to be upset with, but let me tell you what I'm upset with. I'm upset that we are in an environment where the accommodations that you deserve are not being provided to you. So I'm never going to be upset with you for having the need of more time. I am going to be upset at the professor who didn't give you more time for that exam, though. Exactly. I'm going to direct my anger somewhere. But it's never going to be towards you. Glasses are the most normalized accommodation.
I'm a professor now. I'm an adjunct professor and teach food and drug law. And my students who have had illnesses, I had a pregnant student in my class this semester. She was like, I'm so sorry, but I have a Braxton Hicks. I was like, first of all, I'm not a white male professor. This is what I'm thinking in my head. I'm like, you ain't got to tell me she was pregnant. I've been pregnant.
Elizabeth!
She you don't have to write me this whole long email because I already know. And you know what? It's fine. Because I said, you better prioritize your baby and that health. I've been pregnant. I know. That's a struggle.
Listen, I'm happy that you're showing up. Because when I tell you, I remember being like, I might have to reschedule this session. I feel like I'm about to fall asleep standing up. I think I'm making a leg right now. I don't know. But it's taking all my energy. It's taking all my energy. I don't know if it's like the big toe. I don't know what it is, but I can't do it. We're going to have to reschedule or you're going to have me fall asleep and I'm going to lose my license. It's just a lot. Yeah. We have I think people need to think you really need to understand it this way. When it's not your child, it's the environment. Like, how do I provide the accommodations that you deserve? Don't nobody say, oh, look at this woman needing glasses.
Yeah.
Ugh. Can't you just see better?
Yeah.
What?
I don't ever say anything.
I can't see better.
We don't say stuff like that. It's just wild to me. And and there's just so much stigma. There's so much stigma about the autistic community as well that, I try my best to combat where I can. And one of those is this concept of aggression, this concept of violence. And I remember kind of broke my heart when my son was going through his evaluation processes after his diagnosis and while trying to figure out what sort of program to put it in, whether that be public pre-K or a private program, the number of observational evaluations where they were like, oh, good, he's not aggressive. And I'm just like, that's great for my son, I guess, for his placement, but he's 3. I mean, what does that mean? At what point is that ridiculous to look at and have that be a defining factor of where you place an autistic child? Because you're not necessarily looking at why they're aggressive. And it doesn't mean that they're always going to be aggressive. And I don't even know if I like the word aggressive. Not for a toddler, not for
because they're trying to get their needs. They're trying to get their needs met. Like behaviors say things that words can't, and we forget. Especially if individuals are nonverbal at that time, whether it's developmental, they're 1, or if it's the fact that they're a child who is nonverbal. Actions speak words that the behavior, that they can't. Yes. So it's just okay, well, maybe they're a bit more assertive. They're trying to get their needs met.
Exactly. What are you doing?
What are we doing to make it so that they can get it?
What are you doing?
What are we doing?
And what are we doing that causes them to then become aggressive, right? Because I truly believe that a lot of, folks have said, like, well, I saw this, that, and the third. And I'm just like, that sounds like somebody, I would be aggressive as hell too if somebody wasn't meeting my needs
Are you
when
saying,
I was a child.
oh, you didn't ask in the right way? Yeah, you didn't ask in the right way. Or I need you to make contact before I provide you with this treat. Or, it's just like, well, so what I'm seeing is they're asking for something and they're using the way that they know how to. And you're saying it's not the right way.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
yeah.
Where I'm from, people get knocked out for less
by
adults.
Right.
I don't ask you twice. I got to ask you a third time. It's going to be with my fist. Let me tell you something.
Right.
It's just like we're not really, what are they asking for? Do we know what they're asking for? And
exactly.
What actions will always, they speak things.
Always. And I'm not going to excuse, right, if somebody who is, if there's an autistic person who assaults somebody, there is a creator, her name is Bon. She is awesome. I've been following her. I've been mutuals with her for a while. And she made a video about this the other day where she was like, just because you're autistic isn't an excuse to assault somebody. It might be an explanation, but it's not an excuse, right? Mm-hmm. Just like we say with these white boys who are all on the internet saying racist stuff. And they're like, oh, I'm autistic. That's why I said, it's like, boy, shut up. Autism does not make you racist.
Please.
You can't.
And it does. And that's the thing. And it's just, you can't use that as an excuse because there are so many people. And the reason why people don't grasp that, they really need to understand the difference between an explanation and an excuse. Because there are so many individuals who are making the time and energy to work on themselves, taking the time to use their resources, taking the time to use their accommodations. Mm-hmm. And they ain't called me the N-word yet. Mm-hmm. So
that's what I'm saying.
I think we're missing something.
Exactly. Yeah. And so it's like, I do want to put that on the table that like, it's not an excuse. Like, no, like if my son, if he hit somebody, I'm like, wait, I don't just go like, oh, well, he's autistic, whatever. No, that's redirection, teach the correct behavior, all of that. And at the same time, trying to make sure that we prevent that outcome later on, because it's not just in autistic people. We see this in neurotypical people, the aggression that can be caused from not having your needs met. So it's like, if that happens in neurotypical people, it for damn sure happens to autistic people too. Like, come on now, common sense. Like, think about it.
Yeah, I try to explain that to a lot of people when it comes to hitting and children hitting. I'm gonna be like, I'm a grown person, and I'm gonna be honest. If I get too upset, I can tell because my fists are balled up. It's typical for people to want to express themselves that way. We learn not to hit, but it's actually pretty typical to hit. If I get too mad, I'll be like, man, I just want to slap you.
Yes,
I'm not going to.
Right.
I'm an adult and I'm regulating myself, but they're children. Right. It's actually pretty typical to want. I never wanted to hit anyone in my life. There's always someone.
Yeah.
However, you learn how to redirect that.
Exactly. And what I'm boiling this all down to, and what I'm getting at, is that you can't abuse autistic people and then expect them to, grow up to be these regulated folks, right? And you don't expect to abuse a neurotypical person and they grow up to be a well-adjusted, well-regulated adult. Why would you do that with an autistic person? And so it all starts from the beginning, as soon as you can, as soon as you see a diagnosis. And also, like, the last thing that I can just really say to parents is, please stop being afraid of a diagnosis or saying, oh, I don't want to label them. You're just trying to get support and resources for your kid. And I've told this to multiple people. I'm like, pretending that it's not there isn't going to make it go away. You're not going to make it better. It's only going to make it worse.
It's not going to help.
And I mean, I try to have the patience and empathy, but as you've seen on my platform, sometimes I got a short fuse myself. But when I see the posts in mom groups, and especially on Reddit, where they're just like, I'm so afraid about autism and blah, 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 like, reassure me. And they'll, have their little posts or whatever. And like, just go get on the list, get the evaluation if you really think it's a concern. But, maybe get off of social media a little bit too, because it's not.
Yeah, because there's not always accurate representations.
No, it's not. It's not this scary thing that people think it is. It's not the end of the world. And like I said, I called my husband. I was like, oh, they diagnosed him as autistic. He was like, well, what do we do? I was like, oh, they said they gave me the Confirmed Floor Time Center. Cool. What do you want for dinner? And that was it. And we just been going through life since then, and just kind of doing what we do. And finally, like, the final thing that I said that was the last thing, but this is actually the final thing, because, autism is a disability.
You're good.
I got this, this thing. You're not entitled to an able-bodied child. You are not. And I have said this many times on my platform. I have no idea why parents, and I don't mean to be harsh, and I'm talking about parents who planned pregnancies. I'm not talking about unplanned pregnancies. I'm not talking about anything like that. I'm talking about planned, trying to conceive, especially when I see it in the TTC groups that I used to be in when I was trying to get pregnant. I can't fathom why in this day and age parents are still beside themselves when anything happens, whether autism, ADHD, or like I was chronically ill with asthma and immunodeficiency issues from the time I was 2. Why we're not doing better at preparing ourselves for the possibility of having a disabled child when disability is so common. 1 in 6 children will have a developmental delay, and anyone can become disabled at any time. And if your family planning in your mind isn't taking into account like disability, it needs to think about it, because that was honestly one of the things where people are like, this wasn't a curveball for you. I'm like, baby, I already considered this before I got pregnant. I already considered this was already a thought. And I thought, how am I going to be able to accommodate this child if X, Y, and Z? So even when when they thought my baby might have a lethal form, skeletal dysplasia, that about broke me, because the thought of having a what they call what the pro-lifers falsely refer to as a late-term abortion, because that's what happened then. That about, I mean, I was crying for days when I found out that they were like, oh, if he does have it, it's going to be maybe mild form like dwarfism. I was like, oh baby, we gonna buy a house and we just gonna get everything lowered. We just gonna get everything lowered. I was like, we got this. You know, I'm thinking about that, like accommodating disability, because, and I guess that's a good way to close it out, is I was in that in between where I had the potential of a dead child and the potential of a disabled one. And baby, I'll take a disabled child any day of the week, every day of the week. And
about the accommodations. Yeah.
Every day of the week, I'll take my child with all his, whatever disability he has. We're going to work it out. And so that'd be my final thing, to just hopefully give folks some perspective there and like really think about what this means. And so.
And I love this. And I think one of the things you really highlighted is the best way for you to get perspective was to actually talk with individuals across the lifespan who have been diagnosed with this. People who can say, I'm an adult and I went through this and this was harmful for me. And you can take what you want to take. But I will tell you, as someone who had to go through this, not someone who is trained in it, not someone who is, treating it, as someone who was on the receiving end, I did not like it, or it was okay and this was better. So I think that's amazing. You got those perspectives because you asked the people. You wouldn't have me out here asking Reese Witherspoon what to do for Black History Month for women.
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying? Like, love you as that's just put that out there. So thank you so much, Elizabeth. Tell the people where to find you. You're going to be on a stage somewhere because you doing all your shows, but tell them where to find you.
I don't know when this is going to air. Let's see. So you can catch me on Mother's Day at DC Improv. I don't know if this is going to air before Mother's Day. If it's after Mother's Day, I hope you saw me at DC Improv. You can find me.
It's going to air next week.
Okay. Come see me at the DC Improv on Mother's Day. That's in Washington, D.C. I'll also be back to DC Improv with the Washington Roast Show, where I impersonate the lovely Vice President Kamala Harris, along with our other crew of ragtag impersonated politicians. You can find me on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube at the handle Booker Squared. In honor of my maiden name, Elizabeth Booker. I recently told the story on my platform about that, because a lot of people now see my married name. They don't know
where I saw that one.
Came from. Yeah. That's where it came from, y'all. My name was legally Elizabeth Booker, middle name and last name the same. So Booker Squared. You can find me just giving all kinds of political takes, information. And then, of course, I have my podcast, The Devil's Opposing Counsel, which is new. I'll have episode 2 dropping soon. You can find that on YouTube podcast and Spotify, as well as at my website, opposingcounsel.com, bookersquared.com will take you there, and elizabethbookerhouston.com will take you there. I bought all the domain names, baby, because I was like, ain't nobody stealing my name.
Listen, let me tell you something. I was too late on the Mind Your Mental, so now it's Mind Ya Mental, because Mind Your Mental has been taken. So y'all get the domains, because listen, I'm not about to get sued. If y'all notice the last minute change between the your and the ya,
that's what happened.
Said I had a legal obligation. That's what happened.
Yeah, got to stay legal.
But so thank you. You got to stay legal, man. Let me tell you something. You ain't about to sue me off of something I ain't earned. Like, if it's an assault charge and that person earned it, I'm cool. I'm off. You know what, Judge? They deserved it. And I'm here for it. But if it's off of, what you mean? I just spelled the word. I couldn't just spell the word differently. It's just like when I'm insulting someone and people are like, was that an insult? Oh no, my insults, you would know. I want to earn that. I didn't say it. I put time and energy into my insults. I want you to feel the full brunt.
I want you to feel it.
Now, here's the thing. We have to take a moment to understand a crucial issue that affects many individuals in the Black autistic community, particularly women and girls. Research really sheds light on the challenges that they face, not just in daily life, but in the very recognition of their condition in the first place. A groundbreaking study by Dr. Temple Lovelace and colleagues explored the glaring absence of Black autistic women and Black autistic girls in autism-related research. For over 7 decades, the unique challenges and experiences of Black women and girls have been largely overlooked in the medical and educational narratives about autism. And this omission, as all omissions when it comes to Black people and their experience and their history and their well-being and their diagnoses and what they're going through, has profound implications. This particular study found that despite growing awareness of autism, Black women and girls remain disproportionately invisible. And it's not just about numbers, it's about real lives affected by delays in diagnosis and lack of culturally relevant support. How are you going to have culturally relevant support if you are not involving diversity in cultures when it comes to assessment and diagnosis and looking at symptomology and the way it presents itself? The gaps in research and understanding leads to significant barriers in healthcare and education, and it impacts the quality of life and the potential for early intervention. Imagine navigating life with the sense that you're different, but without the resources or recognition needed to understand why. And for many Black women and Black girls, this is a reality where their autism is often misdiagnosed or completely overlooked until much later in life, which complicates their journey towards self-understanding and appropriate support. That's why I wanted to speak with Maria, the founder of Autism in Black, who shares her own journey of being diagnosed with autism as an adult, having a child with autism, as well as being a licensed mental health professional. Her story is not just hers, but it reflects a broader issue that affects countless others. So here is Maria.
For me and our personal experience, it was a lot of trash moments because people did not understand that our culture comes right in the room with us. We don't leave it behind. I think the only time that I was like, oh, these people are a little different, as we had a in-home speech therapy company come to our home, and on their paperwork, they asked the question, are there any cultural traditions in your house that we should know about? And that let me know, oh, they take things a little bit differently. So that I appreciated. Other than that, it's been a lot of training.
So tell me more about how your organization, Autism in Black, fills that gap that you saw that was huge when it came to the intersection of being Black and having an autism spectrum diagnosis.
So with Autism in Black, when I first started it, I didn't know I was autistic. So I was speaking from a lot of the parenting side of it. And what we had noticed is that nobody was standing on platforms and just saying, here we are, and there is no kind of shame. So I wanted to start with that representation for parents of, hey, yes, our feelings are our feelings, but at the same time, there's no need to have that shame. So our organization started by bridging that gap of representation, bridging that gap of bringing that information to our community, because people are not talking to us. They're talking around us, they're making decisions without us, but they're not being culturally responsive. As we've grown, as I've had other kids who have diagnoses, as I've gotten my diagnosis, we've now trained organizations to be less harmful to the Black disability community, to be aware that we walk this walk differently. We have our podcast, we have our annual conference, because we want to be able to get the information out on a grander scale. So for us, it's really about that representation and bringing that information to our community so that people can say, oh, this isn't just a white people thing. Oh, there's other people like me. Oh, this isn't lonely like I thought it was. Oh, look, another late diagnosed autistic Black woman who's talking about her experience. Oh, look, somebody else has a girl who is autistic, and let me go and find out more. So it's all of that we are trying to encompass.
Do you feel like your view or understanding of autism or your diagnosis of autism has changed how you view yourself or your interaction with others?
Yes, it made a lot of sense when I got my diagnosis of my childhood and how I communicate up until now. Because I always felt like, oh, why do people always think I'm being rude when I'm just saying a truth or not catching social clues and knowing that, hey girl, you just because you know it's right, you don't gotta say it. And that necessity to be like, no, let me just help you out here. So it made a lot of sense of, oh, this is why you communicate the way you do, girl. Oh, this is why you did this as a child. This is why you do these things. So for me, it provided a lot of clarity and also gave me permission to give myself grace, because I was holding myself to these standards. I'm like, why can't I not do this? Why do I get so tired after socialization? Why do I do this? Why can't I just be like these other people? Right? So for me, it was give yourself some grace on
That's
that.
amazing. And you know, when I was talking to Amanda Seals about it, she mentioned the word that she mentioned was relief. Like just relief with understanding what was going on. And she mentioned similar statements that you did about, why am I always being perceived as rude? Why are people disregarding my experience? Talking about the aspect of truth. Like, it's not about being nice or being mean. It's about, these are just facts. Earth is round, water is wet. I know more about you than this. And what you stated was objectively inaccurate. That's just a fact. I'm not trying to be mean. If your feelings are hurt by being wrong, maybe read more or maybe listen to the experts in the room. But I'm not trying to be mean, like, which honestly, that's how I talk to people as well. Like, I mean, I don't know everything, but I know what I know. And I do know objectively, I know more than you about this topic. So you can either listen or you can maintain the privilege of your ignorance. It is your choice. I am not going to force you to increase your intellect. That is all on you, honey. So you choose what's more important to you.
Exactly.
Because these are just facts.
Exactly. And that's how, I navigate the room. I'm like, no. And then I'm like, no, this is what it actually is. And I think people are like not so used to genuine people just telling truth. And they're like, oh no, that's just rude. That's just mean. No, it's just the truth. I'm not being mean. I'm not trying to hurt your feelings. It's just the truth and the fact. So I've had to learn, oh, not everybody can handle truth. So I have to try to read the room at times and understand when is this going to be socially appropriate.
And having to read the room is something that I don't think individuals look at in the appropriate manner. Like that aspect of having to read the room. A lot of times I have talked about code switching versus masking. And every time I talk about it, I'm like, just if anyone wants to learn more about this, masking is actually more thoroughly researched when it comes to individuals that have been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. And it's really important to realize that when you look at masking, and the reason why it's so important to have the appropriate language is because masking leads to loss of identity, greater thoughts of suicide ideation, increased likelihood of burnout, anxiety, and depression. And this is also what most Black people are doing, right? It's not only about it's not about code switching, because I say every time, most of y'all are creating whole avatars. You're not just switching your language. You're switching your language and your posture, the way you laugh, the way you wear your clothes, having to watch someone's reaction to see if your reaction is a lot. And this is already exhausting. And if we can acknowledge that it's exhausting just being in this world, think about how much you have to deal with being Black and then having a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder and being Black, when masking is already prevalent in both communities. It's like, so just like you mentioned, it's like, it's hard for me to know if this was racism or ableism. Either way, I'm not getting my needs met, but I don't know what flavor of prejudice this is today. I mean, it tastes, is it cookie dough or is it mint chocolate chip? I mean, it's there. I know it when I see it. But like, I wonder what kind of ism you're going to attack me with today to justify you not providing me with the care I deserve and justify the disregarding. and skirting responsibility. I wonder which one you're going to use. And it's just exhausting in that realm. So when you're thinking about this,
It's very
what
exhausting.
advice would you give to others who might be experiencing similar challenges when it comes to late diagnosis or navigating autism while Black in the first place? Like, you are the perfect person to ask with your organization, your children, your diagnosis. Like, you listen. As a licensed mental health professional, you legit cover all the bases. That's why I said, I know who I'm gonna have on the show. Boom. Like you do. As a parent, as someone who's diagnosed with it, as a licensed mental health professional, as someone who has an organization dedicated to this specific intersection, what other bases are? I mean, that's everything in my opinion. What advice would you give?
First, the masking. I think that also is why so many of us are late diagnosed, especially when it comes to girls, because of our ability to mimic what we're seeing. It's why I was late diagnosed, because I could read and be like, oh, let me try this way, because that's what she's doing. Let me do that. And I think a lot of us are not realizing that we're doing that. So when they hear me speak, or they hear Amanda speak, or any other late diagnosed individual speak, and they're relating to that, dig a little deeper into that, because there's a reason why that you're relating so much to it. As I tell anybody who is, your kid is autistic, you're autistic, we have to take that shame away. We have to be able to have these conversations in our community, because we as a Black community are still so far behind. A lot of what you hear the white autistic community talk about, their steps ahead, their ability to do other things, we don't have that ability, because we're still trying to get that awareness into our community. I can go to my parents' small town in Alabama, and there are still people who have never had an interaction of understanding what autism is. And because of that, their viewpoint on what it is scary. They have that fear of, what does that mean? What does autistic mean? What does autism mean? Is my kid going to be here forever? Are they going to be able to do this? Because we don't have that representation like the other communities do. So I tell people all the time, we have to be able to show that different representation. Because if you're looking in media, if you're going on Twitter and you're seeing large amounts of white autistics, I don't relate a lot to them, because I have to worry about my intersectionality piece. People see Black first. I have to think about my safety first before we even get to my disability. So I tell people all the time to be aware of that intersectionality, because it's so different for us. When you're majority listening to the white autistic community, some of that stuff is just not going to be good information for us. So we have to be careful about we take that information in. Another thing is, find your community. Find people who can relate. And it might not be your family people, and that's okay. It might be other people, because then you don't have to be so exhausted having to explain why an IEP meeting is upsetting to me, why having to, explain A, B, C, and D is so much. They understand. I could say, hey, I had an IEP meeting today, and my friends who are in my community like, well, how did it go? What do we need to do? Rather than, well, this is what an IEP meeting is, and this is why it's so important. And I'm just trying to make sure that my kids get what they need in the school. If I'm already exhausted from the IEP meeting, explaining what the IEP meeting is just further exhausting. So find your community, right? And then know that your feelings are valid, whatever they are. It's never a problem having the feelings, it's what you do with the feelings.
I always say anger didn't get you in trouble. You punching somebody in the face because they done made you angry.
Exactly.
That's why we are in court mandated therapy, honey. Stop saying it's the anger. You got angry and you punched them. Feelings are meant to be cues. They're not facts. You check in with your feelings to do that. I just did a post the other day about the difference between explanations and excuses, right? One has to do with justification for just not acknowledging accountability. But what I have found is that I don't see people, luckily, and you know what this is? I think I'm just surrounded by people who have some sense. I don't see people who use their diagnoses as justification, right? I don't see them. Most of the time, they're using them as an explanation. For example, they're stating, I am feeling overwhelmed in this environment because there are a lot of people talking to me at one time. This is why I'm going to step away. They're not saying, well, I can't help the fact that I screamed at you. I was stressed out. It was too many people. That's not what they're doing, right? Like that's the difference between an explanation and an excuse. You know, so I'm just like, every time someone's just like, oh, well, is that an excuse? I don't see many people using excuses. I see many people using explanations, and people are, instead of acknowledging the explanation and instead of acknowledging the fact that, like, I see you, I understand what you're saying, and I'm going to try to support you, I hear, oh, well, that's an excuse. That was an explanation for my behavior, which I don't even have to do, but that was an explanation for my behavior. And I'm letting you know I'm stepping out of the room, right? There's a lot of people talking to me at once. I already am overwhelmed because we're in like a 5-hour meeting where I haven't, I've had to sit here and I can't, so I'm feeling significantly overwhelmed. And at this point, I can't even contribute to this meeting. So like, I need a minute, and that's not an excuse. I've told you how I felt. I provided you with my option, my accountability. I may miss something while I'm out taking a minute. Please let me know, write it down and I'll return. That's not an excuse,
It's not. I think people are not used to people verbalizing the accommodations that they need, and they'll go over and over and over and be uncomfortable and not feel good because they don't want to state what their needs are. So when people state, hey, I need just 5 minutes alone, or I need to step away, or can you please slow down, or please give a pause so I can state what I'm feeling, people aren't used to people stating, I need this accommodation. So then they take it as, oh, you're just being difficult. Oh, you're too needy. Oh, you need this, instead of, you probably should state what your accommodations are as well. So
it's like people will be like, oh, I would never feel comfortable saying that. Sounds like a personal problem to me. I'm gonna be out for 10 minutes.
Okay? Exactly.
You talk to me about why that's a personal problem. That's not a me problem.
That's a personal
you not
problem.
Feeling comfortable expressing the needs that you have. Okay, but that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying this is what I need and this is where we're going forward.
Exactly. And that's how I navigate. That's how I teach my kids to navigate life, because we have to, if I don't state what I need, how do I expect you to provide that for me? Then I'm the one over here that's burnt out and overwhelmed because I didn't state what I need. I'm going to state what I need. Now, if you can't respect that, then we got to put those boundaries in place. I just may have to not deal with you no more.
And that's a very good point, because you identify it's a boundary, right? Because a boundary is guiding your behavior. Like, I mean, you can stay in here and continue screaming, but my boundary is I'm not going to stay in places where I feel unsafe, and screaming makes me feel unsafe. So you continue on with this diatribe. I'm out. I'm going to control my behavior because I cannot control yours, and I'm going to leave. No, I totally understand that. Do you have any more tips about navigating autism while Black, or dealing with the late diagnosis in the first place?
There's, especially the late diagnosis, there will be ebbs and flows of navigating your diagnosis. Somebody once told me that, hey, this person has been masking for so-and-so amount of years. That person has been protecting you for 37 years in the best way they know how. But now it's time to give that person a break. They've done their job, and now it's time for you to experience the world without that masking, without that having to code switch and do stuff that's so exhausting. So give them their peace and blessings for protecting you for this time, but now it's time to navigate it in a different way, and just understand that it is, there's those ebbs and flows, especially for us as Black people, because we have to navigate society completely different. So be true to yourself and give yourself that grace as a late diagnosed autistic individual. And there's a community of us out here who are navigating it and can support you in the best way.
So everyone's experience with mental health and diagnoses is different. So I thought it was important to ask Amanda.
You said you checked and triple checked and double checked. So typically when people do that, there's something that's stopping them from accepting it. Because you said you checked multiple times. Did you feel uncomfortable with the name of it?
No, I'm a public person. And so if I'm going to talk about something, I need to know for sure that it is what it is. Which is also one of the things I find hilarious when people are like, you're doing such and such for clout. I'm like, y'all niggas really don't know me. Y'all people really don't know me. And that's the other thing, like just people like you and I gotta say a lot of other people during this time have spoken into me in a way that I'm not going to say, my mother's always spoken into me, so it's not that my mother hasn't, but you all spoken to me in a way that strangers have never spoken into me, like in such numbers. And I needed, I'll get to like the explanation of this, but I needed permission. You don't necessarily need permission, but I needed permission to admit that I really am exceptional.
Okay.
And we have lived, like you grow up in a society where as a Black woman, you're not allowed to admit that. You're not allowed to own that without it being a display of haughtiness or of arrogance or you think you all thatness, etc. And it's so unfortunate because all of us are exceptional in our own way. And we are taught that if I claim my exceptionalism, that is inherently attached to me dissing you. That's what we're taught, which is just not, it's not fair. Like we both lose in that scenario. Like we both lose in that scenario. And as a public person, so much of my identity has unfortunately just been attached to public, to exception from a public point of view. And it's taken a lot of work to undo that. But I think just women in general, we are so expected to shape who we are by what people tell us. And then if you decide to go off of what you know of yourself, then you're called being full of yourself. And I want to reclaim that. And y'all will hear me say this in a lot of different places because I'm really claiming this. I am full of myself. I am full of myself. I am full of all that has been poured into me. I am full with the love that I have for myself that I fought so hard to gain. I'm full with the truth that I know about myself that I proved to myself, and it's like we want people to base who they are based on what other people say, but we don't have a community or a society that even holds ourselves accountable for how we treat other people. So it's emotionally like it's counterintuitive. And so that's really, so it wasn't that I didn't accept the diagnosis. It was honestly more so, Raquel, that I was going to be so relieved by it that I needed to make sure for sure that it was what it was, because I've just been told that I'm supposed to dislike myself for so long and for things that I could not change and that I have tried my whole life to change.
Yeah. I feel like the aspect of relief is something that many people have because it provides an answer. And I also think with diagnosis, you can also get access to more resources. And I think it sucks that, I don't know, many people have to wait so long to get that in the first place.
Yes. A lot of adults, they say, though, a lot of adult women particularly don't get a diagnosis until like they're in their 40s. And I am, or they say in their midlife crisis, which is I am smack dab in it.
Unfortunately, it is quite common for a diagnosis to be later for women. In fact, a study by Dr. Leadham and colleagues focusing on the experience of adult women diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder in middle to late adulthood found there was a significant under-recognition of autism in women. And this is due to a couple of factors. One, it was due to gender differences in the manifestation of autism traits. Women often employ compensatory strategies to mask their difficulties, such as mimicking social interactions, which can make their symptoms less notable and less noticeable and lead to underdiagnosis. There's also a stereotypical understanding of autism. Traditional assessments and conceptualization of autism are largely based on men samples, which leads to a lack of awareness among healthcare professionals and understanding how it manifests in women. How are you going to know how it manifests in women if you're only studying the manifestation in men? There's also misdiagnosis and mental health challenges. Many participants reported being diagnosed with various mental health conditions, which overshadowed the underlying autism spectrum disorder. Mental health struggles, including anxiety and depression, were often treated as separate issues rather than a symptom of autism spectrum disorder.
So like even with diagnosis like a attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, women are less likely to get diagnosed because they're more likely to have like the inattentive one. And when it comes to assessments, a lot of times they do put it in this mindset of like the problem child. The reason why the person who has the hyperactive ADHD gets seen is because they're causing a disruption in the class or whatever, versus the young girl who's zoning out. She's not loud. Yeah. She's not disrupting. So we're not going to try to address like things that could make this environment better for her. And then with Black people, it's not. The reason why I did so much work in assessment is because I knew I wanted to focus on Black mental health. And then I also knew the resources that came with assessment. So I was like, I'm going to have to learn how to do this. But what I found with my colleagues is like, there's like, you can't serve someone who you don't see. You can't serve someone who it's like we're in this colorblind mindset. You can't serve someone who you're inherently afraid of. And what I find is that I'll see patients and they came to me with an ADHD or a behavioral diagnosis, and I see them and they have PTSD. But the same behavior like that they have, you see it as like an attitude. And when people are like, how does it happen that you're consistently having to change diagnoses or you see things differently? It's because I see the person, right? What people don't understand, and what I want everyone to understand, is that sleep difficulties, anger, frustration, issues focusing, that's actually the requirement for like 50,000 diagnoses, right? Yeah. The only thing that's different is the person across from you who's assessing you, right? And if that person has biases or prejudices, if that person is inherently afraid of the Black body that they see in front of them, everything is going to be seen as violent. It's not going to be seen as like, oh, that frustration is actually, or that anger is actually clearly sadness or shame or guilt, because you're not even taking the time to know that person, which is one of the reasons why I said, especially Black people, if you feel as though a diagnosis is inappropriate, like get a second opinion. I'm not one of those clinicians who feels like self-assessment isn't appropriate. No one's going to know you better than you. Like the fact that your psychiatrist gave you checklists, so smart. Do you know how many clinicians who, I think half of it is like a fear of their job being taken away, will be like, well, let's slow down for a minute, instead of just being like, all right, you tell me. You know you, right? Yes. You tell me. Do you see yourself in this? All right.
I think you also know, you start to know your patient too. Like, I mean, she knows from our sessions that I am brutally honest about myself, So like, I'm not also going to fill out an assessment and like lie to myself on the assessment. Like I'm going to be honest about what is what. Also, like I'm genuinely seeking the truth. So I mean, I really like my psychiatrist. She loves her job.
So we have heard multiple perspectives about how difficult the assessment process can be across the age band. And Dr. Hoke Echo is looking to change that. She is a board certified pediatrician with 10 plus years of experience who is passionate about delivering the best possible care for your child. And she has recently launched a virtual clinic that offers autism and ADHD evaluation for children. So here are some tips that she provided for how parents can be more effective in the assessment process when it comes to autism and ADHD.
And parents are often curious what signs to look out for if their child is under the age of 1. So I often tell parents that it's important to look for responses of your child. So for example, if your child seems to shy away from being touched, if your baby does that, or if your baby doesn't seem to want to cuddle, if your baby is not making social smiles, meaning you smile at your baby and your baby around the age of 2 months should be able to smile back. If they're not doing that, that's an indication that there could be something going on. And as they grow and get older, sometimes they have motor skills that may be delayed, meaning they may not sit up with support between the ages of 6 months to 7 months, and they may or may not babble by 9 months or even earlier. You may not hear those gooey goo goo gaga sounds that you expect to hear from a baby that could be absent, and they seem to not enjoy being around other people with loud noises. They may be covering their ears, or they may be sitting and rocking back and forth. Behaviors like that, you should definitely bring up to your pediatrician and keep bringing it up, because I always remind parents, you know your child best. You are your child's first advocate. And if there's something going on and you feel it in your gut, you have a gut feeling about it, for sure, bring it up to your physician. And if you're not listened to, don't be afraid to find second opinion, because it is important, because you know your child best. With ADHD, it's important to note that there might be differences in presentation between a boy and a girl. So with girls, sometimes girls tend to be on the quiet side. So if you notice your daughter seems just to want to be by herself, seems quiet, doesn't seem to be focused, seems to be like daydreaming type behaviors, not very responsive. That could be an indication. With girls. With boys, sometimes they're quite hyperactive and maybe distracting in class and unfocused, able to follow multiple directions at multiple instructions at a time. But that's just sometimes, because there are girls that are hyperactive and unfocused and distracting in class as well. So essentially, if there's behaviors that concern you, bring it up to your pediatrician. That's always important. And if you are not listened to, please find someone who will listen to you. That's really critical. I have a story I want to tell about a 4-year-old boy that I saw and whose mom came to me asking for a diagnosis of ADHD. And the complaints were that he was hyperactive, was very destructive or distracting in class, and they were on the verge of kicking him out of preschool. So on further questioning, of course, I told her I don't give diagnosis of ADHD at age 4. I said, okay, let me find out some more about your child. So on talking with her, I found out that the child suffered from constipation, was drinking chocolate milk in the middle of the night. Her child did not sleep well. Her child, therefore, woke up several times at night, didn't have a good night's rest, and definitely was hyperactive. And so I recommended some changes to her. I discussed how a lot of dairy, which he was drinking quite a bit of, could be worsening the constipation or aiding in it. And I also talked to her about the connection between constipation and hyperactivity, the connection between lack of sleep and hyperactivity. And so what we did was slowly decrease the amount of milk he was drinking, and also worked on the constipation to relieve that as well. And so when I saw her in 6 weeks, what was the result? It was amazing, because this boy no longer drank chocolate milk at nighttime. And I wanted to add the connection between sugar and behavior, because there's a definite connection between an increased amount of sugar and hyperactivity or lack of focus in children, or what we call ADHD. So this mother had decreased the amount of milk, actually gotten rid of the milk at night, and increased the amount of fiber and water he was getting every day. And so his constipation had improved, and he was sleeping through the night, no more getting up to drink milk. And amazingly, his behavior in the daytime was improved. So he was no longer going to be kicked out of daycare. He was now sleeping through the night, which meant mom had more rest, and she was very grateful for that. And he was doing much better with his behavior. And so I say that to highlight the connection between nutrition, what we eat, because we are literally what we eat, especially for children whose brains are still developing. We want to give our children the best chance at living healthy, full lives. by making changes now in what they eat, what they drink, because we want it to become a lifestyle for them. And so I think that's something that's really important, is to ask the questions about and to seek out information about how to improve your child's nutrition, how to improve your child's sleep, how to improve your child's digestion, because that absolutely makes a difference in the behavior of your child.
All right, y'all. So I hope you enjoyed this episode, because I certainly enjoyed this new format. I think it's really important to remember that there are so many different perspectives when it comes down to this, and your perspective is also valid. I really wanted to incorporate more information about this diagnosis, but from different perspectives, and I hope to do that more in the future. So thank you so much for tuning into the podcast. Please leave a review. Tell me what you think about this new format. Remember to be kind to yourself, y'all. And also never forget that 2 steps forward and 1 step back is still 1 step forward. That's just math, y'all. Have a good day.